archives, Drew maintained a career average of 20.7 points per game over an 11-season span. That is elite territory. That is the kind of consistent, high-level production that usually gets your jersey retired and your name etched into the history books. He was a cornerstone player who produced night after night against the toughest defenses of his era. Major sports media reports noted at the time that he was one of the most physically imposing wing players in the league, a guy who drew fouls like breathing. But why is he a ghost today? Why didn't the shoe deals, the classic television commercials, and the long-lasting legacy follow him into retirement? Because the story of John Drew stopped being about basketball. As the 1980s progressed, he found himself trapped in a destructive dependency, becoming the public face of a crisis the league was desperate to clean up. In January 1986, according to press conference transcripts, he became the first player banned for life under the NBA's strict new substance abuse policy. The commissioner's hammer came down, and just like that, the scoring machine was permanently exiled. But long before he became a cautionary tale in a league office, he was an undersized second-round gamble from a tiny college who took the pros by storm. You do not usually find future NBA All-Stars hiding out at a place like Gardner-Webb University. It was a small, quiet school in North Carolina, far away from the bright lights, national television broadcasts, and heavy media coverage of the ACC or the Big Ten. But the scouts who actually made the trip saw something undeniable. Drew was listed at 6'6", maybe a little undersized to play the power positions he favored, but he played so much bigger than his frame. He was relentless. According to collegiate sports records, during his senior season, the 1973 to 1974 campaign, he averaged 25.9 points per game. He was dominating the competition, tearing through defenses with a physical downhill style that dared defenders to step in front of him. Reporters noted at the time that NBA front offices were deeply skeptical despite the heavy numbers. Could a tweener forward from a tiny college program really translate that bully ball style to the professional ranks against grown men? That lingering doubt made him slide down the draft boards. He had the production, but he lacked the major program pedigree that general managers trusted. Finally, in the 1974 NBA draft, he was selected in the second round as the 25th overall pick, according to Basketball Archives. The Atlanta Hawks decided to take a flyer on him, hoping his raw offensive instincts would somehow translate to the next level. Atlanta did not know exactly what to expect from the 25th pick, but by opening night, the rookie would force the franchise to rewrite their entire game plan. Most second-round picks in the 1970s were just fighting for a spot at the end of the bench. They were trying to get a few minutes in garbage time and collect a paycheck. John Drew did not just fight for a roster spot. He kicked the door down and demanded the basketball. Right out of the gate, he proved every skeptical scout wrong. He might not have had the classic height for playing in the paint, but he had something you absolutely cannot teach: an unnatural instinct for where the basketball was going to bounce off the rim. During the 1974 to 1975 season, he led the entire NBA in offensive rebounds with 357, according to Basketball Archives. That is a staggering number for a rookie, especially one standing 6'6", going to war every night against the true giants of the era. Television coverage at the time frequently focused on his relentless hustle, showing how he would scrap, claw, and fight for second-chance points while established veterans looked on in disbelief. But the immediate question quickly shifted. How long could his body take that kind of physical punishment? Playing that hard, throwing your body into the trees for 82 games takes a severe toll on a man's knees and back. Yet he never backed down from the contact. He finished his 1974 to 1975 rookie campaign averaging 18.5 points and 10.7 rebounds, firmly securing his spot on the all-rookie team, according to Basketball Archives. His rookie numbers were a massive wake-up call to the league, but as he entered his sophomore year, the offensive floodgates were about to open completely. If you looked at his fundamental mechanics, you might not immediately understand how he was filling up the box score. His jump shot was not the silky, picture-perfect stroke you would teach at a summer basketball camp, but he had a mastery of angles, a brilliant pump fake, and a relentless desire to attack the rim. He lived at the free throw line, consistently baiting defenders into reaching or jumping out of position. He was not just scoring, he was punishing the opposition. According to Basketball Archives, in the 1975 to 1976 season, he averaged a career-high 21.6 points per game. He was officially no longer a sleeper pick or a rebounding specialist. He had become the focal point of the entire Atlanta offense. Defenses started scheming specifically to stop him, bringing double teams and forcing him to give up the basketball, but he just kept finding ways to put it in the hoop. Reporters noted at the time that opposing veterans were openly frustrated, loudly questioning how a player with such unorthodox moves kept lighting them up for 30 points on any given night. But how long could an undersized forward keep throwing his body into the paint before the heavy contact began to wear him down? That question lingered in the background as his star continued to rise. His unique style earned him league-wide respect from his peers. In the 1976 NBA All-Star Game, he was selected as an Eastern Conference reserve, according to sports media reports. He was scoring at will and cementing himself as an absolute cornerstone for the Atlanta franchise. Yet, a bizarre record-breaking game in March 1978 would soon hint at a strange lack of focus creeping into his daily routine. Even the greatest offensive talents in basketball have bad nights. You miss your spots, your legs feel heavy, and the shots simply refuse to fall. But there is a massive difference between a cold shooting streak and completely losing your grip on the ball. For a player known for his steady, high-volume production, an uncharacteristic lack of awareness suddenly became impossible to ignore. According to Basketball Archives, on March 1, 1978, he committed an NBA record 14 turnovers in a single game against the New Jersey Nets. It was a sloppy, disengaged performance that left coaches baffled and fans scratching their heads. You do not just stumble into 14 turnovers without something being deeply disconnected. Television coverage at the time focused on his visible frustration and lethargic body language during the blowout, contrasting sharply with the relentless motor he had built his reputation on. Why was a top-tier scorer suddenly looking so entirely detached from his team's offensive system? As some reports claimed, disturbing rumors began to follow him regarding his conditioning and a late-night lifestyle that extended far past curfew. Despite the whispers, his sheer talent was still keeping him afloat. During that 1977 to 1978 season, he averaged a blistering 23.2 points, but he missed time playing only 70 games, according to Basketball Archives. Management was growing increasingly suspicious of his erratic behavior behind closed doors. But as long as he kept putting the ball in the hole, the Hawks were willing to look the other way, at least until their final run together in 1980. Winning has a way of silencing critics and covering up deep internal flaws. For a brief window at the start of the new decade, it looked like the Atlanta Hawks had finally built a formidable machine around their star scorer. The chemistry was clicking, the roster was deep, and the erratic behavior of the past few seasons seemed, to the public eye, completely resolved. According to Basketball Archives, during the 1979 to 1980 season, the Hawks won 50 games and claimed the Central Division crown. It was a massive achievement for the franchise, validating their belief that they could compete with the heavyweights of the Eastern Conference. At the center of that success was their veteran wing, who had seemingly regained his footing. During that same 1979 to 1980 season, he averaged 19.5 points and made his second All-Star team, according to Basketball Archives. He was back in the spotlight, looking every bit the polished professional. But documentary materials and reporters noted at the time that behind the scenes, a heavy tension was building. Was his renewed success on the court just a temporary mask covering a much deeper, unresolved personal crisis? The front office could see the warning signs that the fans could not. The relationship between his undeniable on-court production and his chaotic personal life was reaching a breaking point that management could no longer control. The Hawks realized they had likely reached their absolute ceiling with their unpredictable star, and in September 1982, the front office finally pulled the trigger on a franchise-altering blockbuster deal. Sometimes a professional basketball team simply hits a wall, realizing that their current roster has gone as far as it possibly can. In the early 1980s, the Atlanta Hawks found themselves in exactly that position. They had a reliable, high-scoring veteran wing who could fill up the box score, but the front office was looking toward the future. Meanwhile, the Utah Jazz were desperate to bring in proven offensive firepower. They needed a veteran presence to anchor their lineup and bring immediate credibility to their scoring attack. On September 2, 1982, he was traded to the Utah Jazz along with Freeman Williams, according to major sports media reports. It was a massive, franchise-altering move that completely reshaped the landscape of the league. The trade was executed explicitly for the rights to the 1982 third overall pick, Dominique Wilkins, according to public franchise documents. Atlanta was willing to part with their established star to hand the keys to an unproven, high-flying rookie. Reporters noted at the time that Hawks fans were initially furious, loudly questioning why the team would give away a guaranteed 20 points a night. But why was management so eager to let their leading scorer walk away just as he was entering the latter half of his prime? Some sources argued that Atlanta management suspected his growing dependency and wanted to move his contract, while others disputed it, pointing strictly to the undeniable upside of drafting Wilkins. The transaction was framed as a standard basketball decision, a simple swapping of assets between a rebuilding team and a squad looking for immediate help. Utah's front office believed they were acquiring a proven 20-point veteran scorer, but they were actually inheriting a man fighting a private, devastating war. The early 1980s were a deeply complicated era for professional basketball. Behind the bright lights and the glamorous Showtime-era broadcasts, a widespread epidemic of banned substances was quietly tearing through locker rooms across the country. The rigorous travel schedules, the sudden wealth, and the heavy physical toll of the game left many players vulnerable to destructive dependencies. And as he arrived in Salt Lake City, the newest member of the Jazz was already caught directly in the undertow. The transition to a new city did not offer the fresh start he so desperately needed. During the 1982 to 1983 season, he played only 44 games due to a mid-season entry into a rehabilitation program, according to major sports media reports. His absence left a gaping hole in the Utah offense and forced the organization to navigate a very public, very painful personal crisis alongside their new star. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on the league-wide substance epidemic, pointing to his sudden disappearance from the court as undeniable proof of a systemic problem. In interviews, he said something close to this, that he had lost control of his routines, allowing a destructive habit to overwhelm his commitment to the game. But what happens when the organization paying your salary has to step in and save you from yourself? The Jazz, led by compassionate head coach Frank Layden, tried their hardest to provide a safety net. In early 1983, he spent 60 days at a rehab facility in Southern California, as reportedly covered in television reports. He stepped entirely away from the hardwood, fighting simply to regain control of his daily life. Many sports writers believed his career was completely over, but the following season, Drew would author one of the most unexpected resurrections the league had ever seen. Returning to professional sports after a deeply publicized personal collapse is incredibly rare. The physical conditioning required to compete at the highest level is brutal enough on its own, but the mental hurdle of stepping back into the locker room with the entire world knowing your struggles is an entirely different battle. Yet, as the calendar turned toward a new campaign, the veteran scorer showed up to training camp looking like a completely different man. He integrated himself seamlessly into a rising Utah Jazz team, playing with a renewed sense of focus and joy. During the 1983 to 1984 season, he bounced back to play all 81 games, averaging 17.7 points, according to Basketball Archives. He was no longer the sole offensive engine, but he provided a crucial, highly efficient scoring punch for a team that was finally learning how to win. According to Basketball Archives, his shooting percentages spiked back to his prime levels, and reporters noted at the time that his teammates openly praised his renewed dedication to the roster. But how could a player who seemed entirely lost to a destructive dependency just a year prior suddenly look so perfectly healed? The league recognized the massive effort it took to rebuild his career from the ground up, deciding to honor his journey in a permanent way. In the spring of 1984, he was awarded the NBA's first ever Comeback Player of the Year award, according to a press conference transcript. It was an emotional high point, a public validation of his hard work and his commitment to staying clean. He stood at the podium, smiling, representing the ultimate success story of a man who had faced his demons and won. He had seemingly reclaimed his game, his reputation, and his life, yet within months that fragile stability would completely shatter. The hardest reality of fighting a severe dependency is that recovery does not have a permanent finish line. It is a daily, relentless choice. For a brief, beautiful window, it looked as though John Drew had finally beaten his absolute toughest opponent. He had the trophy on his mantle to prove it. But as the 1984 to 1985 season tipped off, the cracks in his armor began to show once again. Prior to his December 1984 release, he was still managing to average 16.2 points per game, according to Basketball Archives. The touch was still there, he could still put the ball in the basket, but basketball is not played in a vacuum, and the Utah Jazz organization could sense that their veteran was slipping backward. Head coach Frank Layden was a man known for his deep, familial care for his players. He had championed Drew's recovery, making his sudden return to destructive habits an intensely personal heartbreak for the front office. Reporters noted at the time that his energy and focus had drastically shifted from the joy of his comeback season to a dark, isolated withdrawal. But why did the foundation crumble just when he finally had the unconditional support of a winning organization? The pressure of maintaining his public redemption story simply proved too heavy. Management was faced with an excruciating choice between protecting their rising young roster or repeatedly trying to save a player who was losing his grip on reality. In December 1984, he was waived by the Utah Jazz after playing just 19 games, according to major sports media reports. The team made the painful but necessary decision to cut ties completely. Drew was suddenly without a roster spot or a steady paycheck, right at the exact moment a new NBA commissioner was drafting a merciless policy that would soon target him directly. While one player was fighting a private, agonizing battle in Salt Lake City, the league offices in New York were facing a massive, very public crisis of their own. The NBA in the early 1980s was not the global multi-billion-dollar juggernaut we know today. It was a league struggling with a severe image problem. Advertisers were pulling away. Television networks were hesitant to air games on tape delay, and fans were increasingly turned off by the widespread rumors of rampant, illegal substance use sweeping through the locker rooms. To save the business, the league needed to make a radical, unmistakable statement. Before the 1984 season, the NBA implemented the anti-drug agreement, an unprecedented joint effort with the Players Association, according to public documents. Commissioner David Stern knew that half measures would no longer work. The league and the union agreed to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand to clean up the sport's reputation. According to public documents, the new rule stipulated that any player testing positive for banned substances 3 times would face a mandatory lifetime ban. There would be no appeals, no exceptions, and no second chances once that third strike was recorded. In public material distributed to the press at the time, the league made it absolutely clear that they were choosing corporate survival over individual leniency. But what happens when a strict corporate mandate designed to save a television product collides with a human being who is actively spiraling out of control? The new policy was a terrifying reality check for veterans across the league. Drew already had 2 heavily documented strikes on his record, and the entire basketball world was holding its breath to see if he could walk that incredibly thin tightrope without falling into the abyss. For a long time, suspensions in professional sports felt like temporary slaps on the wrist. You pay a fine, you sit out a few weeks, and eventually you lace your sneakers back up and return to the court. The idea of permanently exiling a highly productive, multi-time all-star from the game of basketball was something fans had never actually witnessed. But David Stern was not bluffing. At the time of his ban in January 1986, Drew was 31 years old and had amassed 15,291 career points, according to Basketball Archives. He was still young enough to contribute to a championship contender. He still had the mid-range game, the instincts, and the sheer strength that had defined his decade-long run. But the league's newly installed drug testing protocols caught up to him, triggering the final devastating clause of the agreement. In January 1986, Commissioner David Stern officially announced the lifetime ban for John Drew, according to a press conference transcript. The shockwaves reverberated through every locker room in the country. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on the shocking finality of the decision, contrasting the cold administrative mandate from the league office with the tragedy of a ruined livelihood. Who was supposed to step in and protect him once the NBA officially washed its hands of his presence? There was no safety net left. The door was permanently locked. Stripped of the only profession he had ever known and cut off from his lucrative salary, the scoring machine fell into a rapid, tragic descent on the very streets of his former basketball home. What happens to a man when the arena lights suddenly shut off, the private flights stop, and the only identity he has ever known is legally stripped away? For a professional athlete, the transition into regular life is often difficult. But for someone actively battling a severe dependency, losing the structure of the league was catastrophic. The stark contrast between a multi-million-dollar basketball star and a man struggling just to survive from day to day became a harsh, unavoidable reality. In December 1986, according to court records, he was arrested in Atlanta for allegedly selling a controlled substance to an undercover agent. It was a jarring, incredibly painful headline for the very city that used to cheer his name every time he pulled down a rebound. Court records showed that his reality had completely fractured. How did an established, prolific scorer end up completely broke and entangled in the criminal justice system? According to people around the situation, his finances unraveled entirely alongside his playing career. He reportedly exhausted his massive NBA earnings, leaving him completely destitute on the very streets he once navigated as a local hero. The isolation was swift. One version says he was deeply separated from the basketball community, cut off from the locker rooms and the camaraderie that had defined his adult life. From the late 1980s all the way through the 1990s, he served multiple stints in correctional facilities, as some reports claimed and public documents reflect. The man who used to dominate the paint against Hall of Fame talent was now fighting a losing battle against a system designed to punish rather than rehabilitate. Decades would pass in absolute silence before the basketball world finally heard his name spoken out loud again, but only to close the book on his story forever. When we debate the greatest pure scorers in basketball history, we rely on the old broadcast tapes, the classic photographs, and the legendary stories passed down from veteran players. But what happens when the league decides to intentionally erase your footage to protect their corporate image? The modern generation of fans has absolutely no idea who John Drew was, and that is exactly how the 1980s front office designed it. He was turned into a ghost, serving as a permanent, unspoken warning to everyone else. Yet, if you look strictly at the raw performance, his offensive brilliance remains undeniable. According to Basketball Archives, he finished his erased career with a .470 field goal percentage. That is a remarkably high efficiency rate for a physical, high-volume perimeter player who aggressively hunted contact. Reporters noted at the time that very few defenders possessed the lateral quickness and pure strength required to keep him away from the rim. But why did the story have to end this way? The 1980s substance epidemic claimed many careers,